Moin, my friends. So this video today is about worshiping in spirit and in truth. Wow. Every charismatic boy out there is like, yes, that is my topic. But what does it actually mean? To worship in spirit and in truth. Because it seems to be very important when the Father is looking for such worshippers. So we find the context in John 4, starting in verse 23, where Jesus says, "The hour is coming and now is when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." So, we see the connection to the last videos where I already talked about walking in the Spirit. Now he talks about worship in the Spirit, worshiping in the Spirit. Where is it coming from? We became spirits. Watch the last videos. We became spirits. So now there is a spiritual realm and reality available for us that we walk in. This is like the main thing we walk by now. This spiritual truth, this spiritual realm and world, that we are seated in heavenly places, and so on. So this is just explaining why the Bible in the New Testament always talks about walking in the Spirit, worshiping in the Spirit, or Ephesians 6, praying in the Spirit. It doesn't really mean to pray in tongues. That's something else. It just means that you now becoming a spirit, understand the realm that you were born into and of, that this now is determining your walking, your worshiping, and so on. So it's not a fleshly thing, soulishly thing where you see and meet another person and it's this, but it's God is spirit, you are spirit, so this must be spiritual. And a quick excursus to worship in tongues, that's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14, where he says, I want to worship with the Spirit sometimes, and sometimes with understanding. What he's saying, he's not contradicting Jesus' words. What he's saying on top, when I'm in the Spirit and I worship in the Spirit, that's just the normal thing I do because I am Spirit. So it's nothing special. It's not that you sometimes worship in Spirit, sometimes just in the soul. You always worship in the Spirit. But in worshiping in the Spirit can now look like two different ways. You can worship in the Spirit with normal words or with tongues. But that's another topic. So back to John 4:24. We worship now in this Spirit. Makes sense because we became spirits, he is spirit, spiritual connection, clear. And that the thing that helps it to settle, because now we're not dependent on place and time and emotions and so on, because there's a spiritual world and reality now, which is outside of time and realm and place and so on, that it needs truth. Because truth helps us to see clearly. Truth sets us free from all wrong thinking, from being soulishly bound to certain things and moments, that we are actually able to, as the context says, not just worship in church on a Sunday between 10 and 12, but to worship whenever and wherever. That we can worship in the car, we can worship at work, we can worship cooking food. It doesn't matter anymore. Because now we are spirits, God is spirit, we worship in spirit and truth. And this truth part is needed. It helps us to actually get personal understanding of God in every situation, regardless of our circumstances, so that it's possible and able for us, now that we're not dependent in that sense on realm and time, place, and location, if it's about to worship God, but we can worship him always. And in order for that to become reality and to be actually fruitful worship, it needs truth, because truth never changes and it always sets us free. That's the power of truth, John 8, that it sets us free from old wrong thinking and so on, but it helps us to get a clear picture and vision of God, who he is in every single situation, whether we feel depressed, whether we feel joyful, whether we feel lost or whatever. It always brings us back to a personal understanding and revelation of who God is, whom we are worshiping. And that is what God is looking for. It's not certainly words, it's not specific words or anything. It's just that it starts to become personal, selflessly looking at him who has saved you, who's your father, who loves you, and so on. As soon as these things settle, this truth, and you worship in spirit, this is what the Father is looking for. So an example is Revelation 4, where the 4 living creatures worship him and say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." That's probably every second worship song on this planet. But the reason they sing it, and they can sing it, because if God seeks them and they are the ones that actually lead all the other people in worship, they must worship in spirit and truth also. Because, yeah, it just makes sense. So now we know that they worship in spirit and truth, and they sing holy, holy, holy. So do we just now must sing holy, 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 and that's the worship God is looking for? No, because God didn't say I'm looking for the right words in worship. He said I'm looking for the right heart, the right attitude. And that is revelation. Why? Because these creatures are in and outside full of eyes, which stands for understanding and revelation. So there is understanding, revelation, which comes from truth. They stand before truth, so they see truth clearly. Of course, they're in the spirit, because they're spirits. They're in the spiritual realm. And that is why this holy, holy, holy is so powerful, because it comes from revelation, personal understanding of who the one is they are standing in front, and they are worshiping because there is truth manifested in that moment as they worship in spirit. So I want to encourage you that it's not about the words, but it's about the heart behind it, that you understand him, and that it starts to become a personal thing in every and any situation of your life, where you can always respond the same way because he's the same person. Not saying you can't complain or anything. You can bring all these things to your Father in heaven, but then let truth sink in, settle, and give you a clear vision and picture of him. That then it's a personal, comes from personal understanding who he is, who your Father is. You sing to, and this is what the Father is looking for.